everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back discussing a mysterious disappearance, and that is the disappearance of a woman named Doris INZUNZA. Before we get started, I'm just going to start with my usual disclaimer, just to let you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover on my channel. I'm simply relaying information I'm able to find myself through researching online, and that means that I may mispronounce things, I may leave things out, I may get things wrong, and I apologise if I do so. I'm not trying to do anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information I have available to me. With all that being said, we shall just go ahead and get started discussing the case of Doris INZUNZA. Doris Edith INZUNZA was born on the 22nd of June in the year of 1956, and in the year of her disappearance in 1997 she was 41 years old. Doris was around 5 foot tall with brown hair, brown eyes, and she was the loving mother to 4 children. Now Doris was an extremely strong and inspirational woman, as throughout her adult life she was a victim to a number of abusive relationships. Her ex-husband had been extremely violent towards her on a number of occasions, and she ended up making the terrifying decision really to file a restraining order against him. He had continually harassed her and stalked her for a number of years, to the point where she was completely fearful for not only her own safety but also the safety for her sons. Although sadly this restraining order didn't initially stop him, the man ended up violating the terms of the restraining order, which led to his arrest, and he was sent to prison for a number of years because he failed to follow the rules of the restraining order, and this seemingly ensured the safety of Doris. However, sadly this wasn't the case. And as it turns out, this would not be the only restraining order that Doris would find herself having to file, as she also suffered abuse and harassment at the hands of an ex-boyfriend. Doris's family and co-workers were entirely aware that this man was a complete threat to her safety, and they actively encouraged for her to file this restraining order against him, following them being witness to a number of his concerning behaviours. He was extremely threatening and intimidating towards her. He'd even placed extremely threatening phone calls to her, and it just got very, very scary and very, very concerning. So yeah, Doris placed this restraining order against him to prevent him from continually harassing and stalking her. Following this relationship, Doris found herself in a secure, non-abusive relationship that seemed to be going extremely well. They were even planning on getting married. So not only was Doris extremely strong in the sense that she managed to get through all of those awful experiences herself, but she also actively sought to help others who had been going through the same thing. Doris co-founded a group called Sacramento Survivors of Stalking, which acted as like a support group for local women who had been victim to abuse, or even just the victims of harassment, really, anything along those sort of lines. They were providing active support and help for anyone in these terrible situations. And this is an extremely commendable thing. She actively helped other people. She tried to help other people using her own experiences, really. And she did a lot of good in the world, and she managed to help a lot of people. The last known sighting of Doris had been on Tuesday the 26th of August in the year of 1997 in front of her home in Rancho Cordova, California. The weekend before her disappearance, she had gone on a short trip away just in the weeks leading up to her wedding, as she was supposed to get married in just 2 short weeks. While she was away, someone at some point had managed to unplug the refrigerator that she had in her garage that was kind of used just for spare storage of food. And this means that when she returned home from her trip, all of the food that was inside this refrigerator had gone rotten, it had spoilt, and it was really stinking out the whole garage. And so on the evening of August the 26th, Doris's neighbours actually witnessed her opening up the garage door to try and air out the smell of the garage because of all this rotting food, while she did a thorough clean of the fridge and any of the surrounding areas to try and clean up the mess. And sadly, this would be the last known sighting of Doris INZUNZA. The following morning, Doris's sister received a concerning and unexpected phone call from one of her co-workers when Doris had failed to turn up for her shift that morning. Her sister was immediately concerned because this was very out of character for her, and last time she'd spoken to Doris, she'd had every intention of going to work that day, so she knew that something had gone wrong. Doris was very, very swiftly reported as a missing person, likely because of the history she'd had with people harassing and stalking her, and local law enforcement set out on a search of the local area in hopes of spotting anything that could link to where she was. Maybe they'd find her herself just wandering about somewhere. They not only gathered up a search party on foot and on horseback, but they also enlisted the help of helicopters in hopes of conducting the most effective and thorough search. But sadly, none of these efforts to locate Doris were successful, and she remains a missing person to this day. One allegedly strange discovery that investigators had found when they carried out a search of Doris's home was that they came across Doris's engagement ring on her nightstand, and her family members have consistently said from the start that she never removed this from her finger, not to clean, not to have a shower, nothing. And they believe that it was purposely placed here by whoever it was that was responsible for her disappearance. There have since been a number of possible scenarios considered in relation to what could have happened to Doris on that fateful night, with many of her family members, including her sister specifically, believing that she was the victim of an abduction. As I explained previously, she had fallen victim in multiple times in her past to harassment and stalking, and because of this, her abusive ex-partners had been kind of the top of the list to be considered and investigated in relation to having something to do with her disappearance. Her ex-husband, whom Doris had previously filed a restraining order against, was a seemingly high-up suspect on this list, specifically because the ex-husband was in jail and the ex-boyfriend had more recently been caught or found to display some threatening behaviours towards her. There was a specific phone call that was noted as being heard by another person from this ex-boyfriend placed to Doris, in which he was heard saying, "You didn't marry me, you're not going to marry anyone else." And so obviously once they learnt of this particular fact, he became a very, very high-up suspect. Law enforcement proceeded to use this information against him to gain a warrant in order to carry out a search of his property, his car, as well as being able to monitor his movements during the course of the investigation. But sadly, nothing solid was brought to light in relation to him being linked to Doris's disappearance. And ultimately, investigators have been unable to prove that he had any involvement in Doris's disappearance, but they also couldn't conclusively say that he wasn't involved either. Another explored avenue was the potential involvement of her fiancé, as it typically is. It kind of explored in these sort of investigations where the partner is a very high up suspect just by default in a sense, simply because they would obviously have the most access to them, they would know where they were, they'd probably be able to, in this case, blame it on someone else. So, for example, if her fiancé had been guilty of kidnapping Doris, he'd been able to blame one of the abusive, harassing ex-partners of hers. From what I could find, however, this is really not a very likely scenario, as he showed no signs of following in an abusive pattern that her ex-partners had, and he seemingly didn't have any reason to be involved in her disappearance. It is also possible that through her work in Survivors Against Stalking, she may have made some enemies in the ex-partners of the women that she was able to help. This avenue specifically doesn't really have any evidence behind it, like specific pieces or examples to support it, but it has been a suggested scenario, and I'm sure it's definitely one that's been searched. There is also just a lot of uncertainty regarding how her fridge in her garage was unplugged, as this is not exactly something that can just happen, or it would happen to a lot more people a lot more often. The most supported scenario was that it was somehow done by a stalking ex of hers who knew it was then likely for her to have to open up the garage door in order to clear out the fridge and get rid of the smell, which then allowed them entry either into her home or just allowed them entry into the garage, where she would likely be alone and vulnerable while she was cleaning out the mess. But sadly, all of these have just been kind of speculated. They are just potential scenarios. But sadly, each of these scenarios have just been speculated. They've just been suggested scenarios. There is no way to be able to prove at this current point whether any of them are in fact what happened to Doris on that day. This is an absolutely heartbreaking case, and I genuinely hope for Doris's family's sake that some answers are found soon. Doris INZUNZA was an extremely strong and inspirational woman who brought so much light into the world by helping others through their difficult times, and she was able to use her own pain and her own experiences to help others. So I really, really hope that she, or at least her family, get some justice for whatever happened to her. So that is everything I'm going to discuss on the disappearance of Doris INZUNZA. Let me know your thoughts down below as always. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.